Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, September the 22nd, 2023. Today I want to return to the subject of Russell Brand, but I want to take a slightly different approach. I don't want to focus on conspiracy theories or whether or not one is anti-vax, whether or not the establishment was out to get him. Rather, I want to focus on society's response to him. Now, with Russell Brand, comparisons have been made between his situation and other television presenters in the past who have been accused of sexual abuse. And I'm thinking particularly of Rolf Harris and Jimmy Savile. Now, those two names are very important in the collective memory of probably most people in the UK above a certain age. Rolf Harris was really part of the establishment. Everyone loved Rolf Harris. He did lots of charity work. He was seen as being an all-round nice person. And Jimmy Savile, I suppose to an extent, yes. Both these men were in television for decades. People grew up with these men in front rooms on their television sets, and they were completely trusted, and then they were vilified. In the case of Jimmy Savile, it happened posthumously, and I think that the vilification happened perhaps because the script got broken. So you had an idea that someone was a pillar of the establishment, pillar of respectability, someone that everyone could trust, and then you realise that no, they're not like that at all. It's a kind of a shock. You can't keep two images in your mind. You can't keep the image that this person is a respectable TV personality, and the fact that they are a sexual abuser. You just can't do that. It's very difficult, and so that's why they may have got particularly vilified. Now, in the case of Russell Brand, as has been pointed out, he wrote a memoir, My Bookie Wook, I think it was called, where, in a sense, he was quite open about his promiscuity. He was being very clear about who he was. So these allegations that have just been made against him, they're not incongruent with what we see of his personality, what we know of his personality, and this might suggest that he may not be destroyed and vilified as much as, say, Rolf Harris and Jimmy Savile were. And I wanted to look at other people, perhaps in the same situation, and I'm thinking particularly of the 1960s playwright Joe Orton, and I want to look at his chart today. And Joe Orton came from a relatively humble background, like Russell Brand. In fact, Joe Orton came from a very humble background. I think his father was a gardener in Leicester, and he became a celebrated playwright in London in the 1960s. And darling of the West End crowds. You know, he was particularly famous for his farces, and yeah, he was recognized as being very talented um, and very funny, but there was a dark side. He was extremely promiscuous. I mean, he was gay. Now that doesn't mean he's just because he was gay doesn't mean he's promiscuous. But he, he frequented public lavatories, and he went to Morocco and consorted with male prostitutes, particularly underage male prostitutes. And what's more, he wrote it all up. He wrote it in the Orton diaries, which were published in the mid-1980s. That would be, 20 years after his death. And he went into complete detail about what he did. And it's his diaries. There was nothing was spared of the imagination. We knew what he did. You think, when you think of underage prostitutes, that's paedophilia, isn't it? You could say, but his reputation wasn't really damaged by that. I mean, he was born in Leicester, in the English town of Leicester, and in Leicester there is a square named after him, Orton Square. I don't think it's been renamed, and so that's kind of interesting, and maybe that gives hope to Russell Brand. We don't know quite. We don't know whether these allegations are true, but it shows he should be able to maintain his reputation, because he hasn't behaved out of script. He's made it clear who he was. He wrote this memoir, My Bookie Book, where he was clear about it. Likewise, Joe Orton, his diaries very clear about what he was up to, and no one has, no one wants to, I don't think, has sort of banned his books, cancelled his memory as a brilliant playwright, and we can think of someone else, William Burroughs, for example. William Burroughs is celebrated as a brilliant author, and everyone, well, not everyone, but if you're into Bill Burroughs, yeah, he's great. I mean, I've read two of his books. I read Junkie. I read Naked Lunch. He talks about his drug use. He talks about his sexual exploits, and he also refers to William Tell, the William Tell routine. That's when he shot his wife dead. I mean, quite deliberately, he shot his wife dead. He fired a bullet at a glass which was resting on her head in Mexico City. And just before he said that, he said, what did he say? He said in Mexico City, he said, "It's time for our William Tell act." And then apparently he got a revolver out. His wife, they were both drunk or inebriated or whatever. He put this glass over on her head, and he shot at the glass but missed and killed her. And I was looking at. I remember a long time ago. I think it might have been Allen Ginsberg talking about this event. The poet wrote The Howl, and I think it was him. I think he said something like, Yeah, this was a very important moment in Bill's life and all this kind of stuff. So if you're completely transparent about it, if you don't behave out of script, you can almost literally get away with murder. He managed to, apparently, Bill Burroughs managed to bribe people in Mexico City and everything, and he was okay, got out, and carried on with his brilliant literary career. So I want to look at the horoscopes of these people I've been talking about, and I particularly want to focus on Mars and Jupiter, because I think Mars and Jupiter conjunctions, Mars Jupiter squares. I want to see how they're working out, and perhaps how these Mars Jupiter aspects might be linking to sexuality. Although I should say that Bill Burroughs does not have any Mars Jupiter contacts, so I kind of threw him in as an extra. But I had wanted to talk about Bill Burroughs, but I haven't really had a chance. So that's quite a lot to unpack. I think this video might well be quite rambling. So I hope I make sense through it. But before I do my major ramble, I want to talk about today's astrology. And today, of course, is Friday, September the 22nd, 2023. So let's see what's going on today. Okay, so here we go. That, by the way, is Joe Orton. His photo is on top of that of Russell Brand. So, as far as today's astrology is concerned, the moon today moves from Sagittarius to Capricorn. Now, if you're in London, the moon changes sign at 21:20 in the evening. In other words, 9:20 p.m. So, really, in London, for most of the day, the moon is in Sagittarius, and it doesn't go into Capricorn until very late. If you're in Paris or Berlin, it goes into Capricorn even later. It goes in at 10:20 p.m. If you're in Asia, Australasia, New Zealand, then the moon is going to be in Sagittarius all day long. If you're in New York, East Coast, moon goes into Capricorn at 4:20 in the afternoon. If you're in Los Angeles on the West Coast, it goes into Capricorn at 1:20 p.m. So certainly on the West Coast, Pacific, California, Oregon, Washington State, you've got a great chunk of the day in which the moon is in Capricorn. Now, if you're in America, so really it's an issue, this moon sign change, if you're in the Americas. So if you are in the Americas, you might suddenly see this change sometime in the afternoon, moving from the sort of Sagittarius, expansive, sparking way of looking at the world, having fun, being free with your thoughts and your words, and then suddenly things get a bit serious as the moon goes into Capricorn. Suddenly we start thinking about material realities, and I suppose we might start becoming more selfish. Because the moon is in Capricorn. The moon in Capricorn can be quite selfish. It's all about thinking about one's own selfish interests and the selfish interests of one's family and one's clan and one's group. And so that gives you the general idea of the moon moving into Capricorn. Now, there are some important aspects involving Mars. On a sort of fairly light note, Mars is making a biquintile to Uranus. There's Mars, there's Uranus. They are 144 degrees apart. So Biquintals are about style. That's why I said it's kind of light. So some of us might want to adopt a style relating to Mars and Uranus. That could work in many ways. I mean, I suppose if you're in a state which is sort of open carry, you might feel you want to carry a gun around with you. I'm not recommending you do that at all, but that might be the style you want to adopt, because Mars and Uranus, Mars and Uranus sort of can be about guns and violence, but because it's style, it's not that you really want to cause any harm. You just want to adopt that particular style. For example, I'm in Washington State. It is I believe it's an open carry state, and we know some people. They occasionally carry. They open carry every now and then to I think to establish a point. It's the style they want to adopt, and so they in terms of they want to make a stand against for social justice and that kind of thing, and it's very much part of their style. Some of them carrying weapons. It's their style. I don't think they'd hurt a fly though. And so it might be to do with how you dress, how you want to dress up. Maybe you want to, Mars Uranus style. You might want to wear a flak jacket, for example, wear something military, that kind of thing. Or you might want to idolize military stuff. You might find people talking about warfare in a very sort of loud, know-it-all kind of way. That's a style that people might want to adopt, but I suspect that's pretty light. But Mars is also making a sesquiquadrate to. Mars is also making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. Now that's not so fun. Here's let me just show you that Mars is at 1659 Libra, Saturn is at 158 as Pisces, so they're 135 degrees apart. That's 3 slices of the cake if you cut a cake into 8 equal pieces. That's more grinding. It's more tough. It can be it can be quite cruel. It can, as I often say when talking about Mars Saturn, it can be the death pair, and there may be a concern about death, thinking about death. You just can't help it. But also Mars, Mars is how we try to assert ourselves. And if it's making a sesquiquadrate to Saturn, we might find we just can't get it done. We're just hitting a brick wall, and this can make us frustrated. It can make us angry. And I suppose it could make us do something stupid, be too hasty, not pay attention. And as a result, we could do ourselves an injury. Now, Mars and Saturn are making an eighth harmonic aspect, because it's 3/8. Mars and Uranus, because it's 2/5, it's a 5th harmonic aspect. So 8 times 5 is 40. So what would happen if you took all the planets in the sky and you multiplied you took their longitude and latitude, and you multiplied it all by 40, and then you reduced it by 360 continuously until you got under 360, then you'd have your 40th harmonic chart. And I actually did a 40th harmonic chart just for fun. And this is what the 40th harmonic chart for today looks like. I set this for 9 in the morning, New York, obviously September the 22nd, 2023. And this is, I suppose, the complete struggle to create a certain style. That's what this chart is about, a struggle to create a style. And so we see a conjunction in the 40th harmonic chart between Mars, Saturn and Uranus. So this is about the struggle to create a fairly violent and tense image. And I'm not saying that all of us are going to get involved in this struggle, but we might see some people do it, in terms of their language, in terms of the way they're dressing, really, really struggling to show a sort of militaristic style, and to sort of which embodies the tension that they feel. Or maybe I'm just overinterpreting, and I just may be making too much of it. I should also say that Mars and Saturn, going back to today's regular chart, Mars and Saturn are on the Vulcan Aries midpoint. They're aspecting the Vulcan Aries midpoint. Vulcan is a hypothetical planet. The Vulcanus Aries midpoint. Vulcanus is about force, and Witte talks about it in terms of when I say Witte, I'm talking about Alfred Witte's rules for planetary pictures. He refers to it as being about, and him and his collaborators talk about it being forced to do something at gunpoint. Now, that's not literally what it's about, I don't think. But some of us might feel we're under pressure. We're being forced to do something we don't necessarily want to do. Or it might be us creating that pressure. So as soon as you feel that pressure getting too strong, you've got to bug out. You don't want to get involved in that kind of situation. And there is a suggestion there that some people may be throwing their weight around. Also because you've got Aries and Jupiter on the Saturn-Pluto midpoint, that is about people wanting to get their way, and I've talked about that before. And so that is really building up. So as you can see, today could be quite stressful. There is actually quite a lot going on. And some people probably do need to be avoided. So let me now do my forecasts for the 12 star signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for Friday, September the 22nd. 2023. Okay, well, let's build this up. Okay, so let's get going with this. Okay, so Aries, it's an unpredictable day when things could go in many directions. Perhaps you can gently turn your lofty thoughts into concrete reality. But with Mars making an 135-degree aspect to Saturn, there could be real frustrations, and you may feel that you're being pressurized. Don't allow yourself to play other people's games. Taurus, you're thinking ahead, thinking about what comes next and what comes after that. It's nice to be forward-thinking, but you need to focus on the task in hand. It needs to be done well, and second best won't be good enough. And if you want to make someone happy, or you want to strengthen any particular relationship, the preparations will really matter. Gemini, you're not going to get straight answers, either from yourself or from other people. It's because the truth doesn't feel comfortable, and it seems more convenient to hide or obscure it. Yet nothing remains hidden for long, and the truth leaves its clues and markers. Elsewhere, some of the people close to you may be behaving like bulldozers. Cancer. You feel that it's time for a change. The routines you've tied yourself to are getting boring, and you want something more interesting and more satisfying. And what helps is meeting the right person, someone who understands your point of view, who gives you enough freedom to be yourself. Leo. First, you have to see the possibilities and perhaps try a few things out. Then you have to make choices, and in the process narrow your options. This narrowing process might feel very restrictive, but it is the right thing to do, because without clear goals you could drift and even stagnate. Virgo. You're starting to break free from a set of restrictions that has been bugging you for some time. You're now aware of new possibilities and you can start using your talents, but you can't ignore other people. There are certain people that want results almost to the extent of expecting the impossible. You therefore have to create some boundaries for yourself. Libra. It might be best to avoid too much contact with other people. I say this because Mars, your relationship ruler, is making a stressful 135-degree aspect to Saturn. Partners and others could be almost insufferable, and you might feel that they are projecting their frustrations onto you. So don't be afraid to be selfish, and don't be afraid to take steps to look after yourself. Scorpio. Today, you could be difficult, and you're quite capable of dragging people down. It's because Mars, your ruler, is making a difficult aspect to Saturn. Everything is hard work, and there's a danger that you respond to the situation by undermining the world around you. You have to take responsibility for the situation, and also show some consideration. Sagittarius. You can feel yourself reaching out to the world at large because you know that what happens out there also affects you. In some ways this is good because you're showing a level of consciousness that's a step up from the rest of society, but in the process you might create an unreasonable set of demands. Capricorn. The moon is starting to move into your star sign. You'll become more focused on yourself and on your vital interests, and I think this is good news. You can make your position clear and gain respect from others. Yet, in career and business, there's one particular person who could cause a lot of trouble. But don't overreact. Aquarius. There's a bit of aggravation, perhaps relating to money, and it might seem that whatever you do, you'll get criticised. It's a situation where you need to stick to your principles and not be bullied into changing your mind, and there are some things you should probably keep quiet about. Pisces. You do feel that things could be better, and that with the right moves you can change everything. You're probably right on all counts, but once you start creating change, it may be difficult to stop, and you could engineer a situation that is impossible to reverse. So think carefully before pressing the button. So what I'm going to do now is move to the I Ching. So as always, I threw 3 coins in the air and I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was hexagram 42, increase. We've had this quite recently and it's a good hexagram. It's about getting more of it, whatever we want, whatever is important to us, we can gain more of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean money. It can be wisdom. It can be happiness. If we collect something, then we can get more of whatever it is that we collect. And it's very important to persevere. So we just can't just say, oh well, we're just going to sit around and wait to get more money or more whatever we want to get. We have to persevere. We have to decide what we want to get more of, and then do what we can to really get more of it. And I think we can be quite successful. And the third line moves, not just the second. And with the third line moving, we had this third line moving very recently. What it means is that we can benefit from an unfortunate situation. Something is wrong, needs to be fixed, and somehow we can benefit from it. And I don't think we should. I don't think we should feel guilty about it. That's okay. Then we have the fifth line moving as well, and that suggests we can get some kind of recognition. We're trying to increase ourselves. We're trying to boost our profile, and in the process, yes, we do get some recognition. And this whole thing, this hexagram, because we've got three lines moving, it moves to a second hexagram. And that second hexagram is hexagram number 26, which is the taming power of the great. The taming power of the great is about restraint. It's about self-discipline. So we start building ourselves up because we've got increase, but we know we have to maintain our gains, and the only way we can maintain our gains is through discipline, by showing maturity, by controlling ourselves, and by controlling the people around us. And I don't mean controlling in a sort of dictatorial kind of way. It's just understanding that this is a time where discipline is required. There's no room for sloppiness, and we want to keep what we've got. We want to keep those increases we've sorted out for ourselves. And I believe that that we really can do it. So if we behave in the right way, the I Ching suggests that it should be an okay day. It's kind of more sort of optimistic than the astrology, but I think with the taming power of a great, I talked about these difficult aspects, Mars aspecting Saturn, for example, people being pressurized to do things perhaps against their will. And the taming power of a great means that we've got to hold firm. We don't have to get hysterical, but we just need to hold firm, hold to what we believe in, and not be pushed off our path. And then we should be fine. So I now want to move to the astrology. So there are quite a few charts I want to look at. I don't really want to spend too long on particular charts, but we'll see how it goes. So the first chart I want to look at is Russell Brand's chart. I've already looked at this chart twice, so I don't really want to go into major detail on this chart because I've already covered it, and I'm thinking particularly here of his Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Aries. Now, Mars and Jupiter. Mars is about how you assert yourself. It's about assertion. It's in Aries. Mars in Aries really likes to just do what it wants. And it can be, it can be quite assertive, can be quite abrasive, and it's conjunct Jupiter. And I know it's 7 degrees off this conjunction, but remember he's got the moon in Aries as well. And I somehow kind of think that the fact that he's got the moon in Aries kind of boosts the power of this Mars Jupiter conjunction. So I think that is an important thing in his chart. And when we look at this promiscuity that he has referred to himself in his memoir, I think it was My Bookie-Wook, that's pure Mars Jupiter, isn't it? It's not Mars square Jupiter, not Mars opposition Jupiter. It's Mars and Jupiter coming together. This is who he is. This is how he wants to behave. This is him. He's honest about it. He's not hiding it. He's not like, Jimmy Savile or Rolf Harris in the way he asserts himself. He's not hiding anything. He's putting it all in his book, Mars Jupiter. Really, that's very clear, isn't it? So that's the starting point. One aspect in his chart that I haven't talked about, it's not really relevant to what I want to talk about today, but as I can see it, I think I need to mention it, is that his Jupiter, you can see his Jupiter is at 1718 Aries. His Saturn is at 1718 Cancer. In other words, he has an exact Jupiter-Saturn square. Saturn is not in great shape. Saturn is square his Jupiter. He, in terms of profections, his annual ruler, because he was 48 last birthday, and so if you count one sign for every year, you get around to his ascendant, his Capricorn ascendant. So that Saturn in Cancer it's his year ruler, and that Saturn in Cancer is square his Jupiter in Aries. So he is a very Jupiter in Aries person with the Mars conjunct Jupiter. So really that Saturn is square his Mars Jupiter conjunction. So it's really hitting at Mars Jupiter. But without that Saturn in a pure form, that Mars Jupiter just is about him just being himself. And I think that very, very often may be a sexual element to Mars Jupiter. Sex is not just about Venus Mars. Mars Jupiter is about Jupiter just acting on impulse. And that Saturn, another manifestation of that Saturn, Jupiter-Saturn, exact Jupiter-Saturn square. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle is often about economics and politics, and maybe that exact Jupiter-Saturn square is one of the reasons why he set himself up as a political and social commentator, on his YouTube channel, talking about his views on various things, and having an increasingly political content. But you can see he's been into politics and commenting on politics for quite some time. Now we move into Joe Orton's chart. Now Joe Orton is obviously in a very different person, although like Russell Brand, he came from quite a humble background. He came from a very humble background. I do not have a time of birth for Joe Orton. So here's Joe Orton's horoscope. He has a Mars Jupiter conjunction in Virgo. That is very physical. And again, from a sexual point of view, nothing could hold him back. I mean, he did what he wanted to do. In fact, he was quoted as saying, that Mars, Jupiter in Virgo, very physical sign, Jupiter. He was quoted as saying, have fun with your genitals, because if you don't, you'll regret it. That's one aspect, perhaps, of his Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Virgo. And that Mars-Jupiter conjunction on Virgo, he has got Mercury square his Mars-Jupiter midpoint. Joe Orton, by the way, he was murdered by his boyfriend on August the 9th, 1967. His boyfriend was a cat. His name was Kenneth Halliwell, and Kenneth Halliwell, he smashed him over the head with a hammer 9 times, and I suppose, Joe Orton did have his sun aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's his Mars-Saturn midpoint, and his sun was 45 degrees from his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So that might say something about, the Death was kind of in his plays. One of his plays was Lute. There's a lot of a coffin played a big. I think the lute got hidden in a coffin. I think that's his most famous play. But his death, I think the suicide note that Kenneth Halliwell left said, "If you read his diary, all will be explained. KH. PS. Particularly the latter part." So yeah, Joe Orton really, with his Mercury on his Mars Jupiter midpoint, he wrote this diary which he just said everything, all his sexual adventures, everything was there. And so because he was so open and honest, Mercury in Sagittarius, Venus in Sagittarius. That Venus, by the way, is square his Mars-Neptune midpoint. Mars-Neptune midpoint, Mars-Neptune as a conjunction is about sleaze, the underside of life. In his case, it was, sex, prostitution, the whole sort of Tangiers, Morocco scene, which at the time, was quite certain people went, for the male prostitutes. I think William Burroughs was I think a bit earlier. That was one of the places he hung out. And so Venus on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, square of a Mars-Neptune midpoint, represents the sleaze. But in terms of Joe Orton and Russell Brand, who both men had a Mars-Jupiter conjunction, they are what they are. Both of them wrote books. Okay, Russell Brand did not write a book as explicit as the Orton Diaries. The Orton Diaries was, of course, not published while Joe Orton was alive. But still, they are what they are, and Joe Orton's reputation has not been completely destroyed, even when it has been discovered that he was consorting with underage male prostitutes in Morocco, which is kind of essentially paedophilia. So that's Joe Orton. And then we look at someone who did have trouble, Rolf Harris. So Rolf Harris's reputation, unlike Joe Orton, has been completely destroyed. And I think because he broke the script. The British public had a script, and and it didn't fit when we found out about his behaviour. And you see, he did not have a Mars-Jupiter conjunction. He had a Mars-Jupiter square. So there's Rolf Harris's chart. You can see there's his Mars in Pisces, and there's his Jupiter in Gemini. So it's more difficult when it's square. When it's square, he's kind of... it's a struggle to assert that Mars in the way he wants to do it. He has to kind of do it behind closed doors. He has to do it in a secretive way. Particularly, Mars in Pisces, that is a bit underhand. And it's square Jupiter. He can't let the Mars energy. He can't be completely open about the Mars Jupiter energy, like Russell Brand was, even more so like Joe Orton. And you can see that Rolf Harris, like Russell Brand, has the moon in Aries. He's got a load of planets in Aries. Just to remind you, there's Russell Brand's chart. 3 planets plus Chiron in Aries. Then you've got Rolf Harris. Has 5 planets in Aries. But we can still see that struggle with Mars and Jupiter. Then we've got Jimmy Savile. So Jimmy Savile was a Scorpio. So let's have a look at Jimmy Savile's chart. So Jimmy Savile, like Rolf Harris, has a Mars-Jupiter square. Jimmy Savile's Mars-Jupiter square, if you look, has got 0 degrees Aries on the midpoint. So he's got Aries on the Mars-Jupiter on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So how would that work? Well, from a sexual point of view, clearly Jimmy Savile was not revealing to the world how that Mars-Jupiter, he was not revealing, how his sexuality was really manifesting. Of course, when the world found out, or when Britain found out, because he was really a British celebrity, he was already dead, but his reputation would never recover from that. But the Mars-Jupiter on the Aries point suggests that he was, perhaps, with that Aries point being the world at large, he was able to manifest some of that Mars-Jupiter energy in a public way through his television, through, he was it Top of the Pops in the 60s, the first sort of mainstream pop music program on British television, I think, through Jim Will Fix It, coming over as being a generous, larger-than-life person. Everyone loved him. So that was one aspect of his Mars-Jupiter. Then there was a darker side. It was a square, and he couldn't get that out. So the Mars-Jupiter square is perhaps more of a problem. Incidentally, another person who had a Mars-Jupiter square was the French philosopher Michel Foucault. Obviously, a celebrated French philosopher. I didn't set up his chart, but the sexual aspect of Michel Foucault's Mars-Jupiter square was the fact that, sort of early 80s, he was in California hanging out in sadomasochistic bathhouses and having unprotected sex. And in the end, in 1984, he died of AIDS. So, he was... almost right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. He was one of the first people to die. I'm sure that you think of his Mars-Jupiter square and the sort of sadomasochism, and maybe that was not a clear presentation of his Mars-Jupiter energy. So that's one way of looking at it. Finally, I want to finish with Bill Burroughs. He doesn't have any Mars-Jupiter. He doesn't have any Mars-Jupiter contacts. So yeah, Bill Burroughs, celebrated American writer, famous for Naked Lunch, Junkie, and unlike Joe Orton and Russell Brand, Bill Burroughs came from a fairly wealthy background. I think he went to sort of Ivy League, and he's still celebrated. It didn't damage his writing career. The fact that I don't know whether you could say he murdered his wife. I suppose he'd say he was drunk. It was certainly manslaughter, or some degree of homicide. Maybe not first degree, but I suppose nowadays, if you did that to your wife, that would be the end of your reputation. But at the time, he was able to get away with it. Now, Bill Burroughs. What's interesting about Bill Burroughs' chart is he's got a Sun-Venus conjunction, and I've talked about the Sun-Venus conjunction before, and the Sun-Venus conjunction can represent someone who mistreats women. Venus is the woman, whoever that woman might be. In the case of the shooting, it was his wife, Joan Vollmer. That's a Venus, and it's conjunct Sun. So Venus is combust. And in this case, it really, I suppose, I hate to say it, but it really worked, but not in a very nice way. He shot his wife, and it's on the Aries point. Perhaps that makes it extra strong, because at Sun, Venus, he's got Aries on the Sun-Venus conjunction, and it's because Aries is 45 degrees from a Sun-Venus conjunction. So he's got Aries on the Sun-Venus midpoint, and Sun-Venus are together. So, I think and that shows how he kind of uses it. He shot his wife. He didn't hide the fact. He actually made it part of who he was. I think in Naked Lunch, long time ago, I haven't read the book for decades ago since I read the book, but I think he talked about the William Tell routine in there, and yeah, it did his career no harm at all, and may even have actually benefited it. And so you compare that with the allegations made against Russell Brand. I mean, what the accusations are pretty minor compared with what Bill Burroughs did, but maybe people take the view that he's so talented he's allowed to do that kind of stuff. I don't know. Now, as far as the transits are concerned, when he shot his wife on September the 6th, 1951. Main transit was there's Mars. Mars was at 12 Leo, so Mars was opposition his Venus-Uranus midpoint. So, that kind of fits, doesn't it? Venus-Uranus, the potential for a woman to have an accident, and then Mars is on the Venus-Uranus midpoint. That's when he shoots his wife. I don't have a precise time for when it happened. I know she died at on September the 6th, 1951. I just set this for midnight, September the 5th, September the 5th, September the 6th. That's the main thing. Oh, Jupiter was semi-square his ascendant. We do have an exact time for William Burroughs, so I suppose you could say Jupiter semi-square his ascendant. That's, he was drunk. I suppose Jupiter would make sense. Or was he recovering? One of them was recovering from, was it amphetamine addiction, or had amphetamine withdrawal, or I think it might have been his wife who was having amphetamine withdrawal. So they were all in a complete state. And so Jupiter semi-square ascendant as well. That's when he decided to play the do the William Tell routine. So those are a few charts. I mean, that is absolutely the last word on that's the absolute last word on Russell Brand, I hope. So I just wanted to look at the Mars Jupiter and how it might be working. And I know I haven't really looked at this aspect in great detail, and I also know that William Burroughs doesn't have Mars Jupiter, but I thought I'd kind of throw him in as an afterthought just to show how certain people can almost literally get away with murder. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. I hope you didn't find my ramble too boring. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.